Welcome everybody to our March. My gosh, I'm looking at the calendar going, our kids are just about to finish school for the first term. Where the heck is that gone? They only have 4 terms in a year. I can't believe we're towards the end of March already. But if you haven't joined before, I'm Sonia Cuff. I'm a senior cloud advocate for Microsoft, which means that I report to a manager in Redmond and our head office. So I work for Corp. I engage with IT Pro audience, and my background is good old on-prem sysadmin. And I talk a lot about bridging the skills gap and moving into the cloud, doing Azure cloud infrastructure and IT operations, especially when you've got workloads that are in more than one place now. So we're not just on-prem or just in cloud, and we have to manage these hybrid environments. So that's me, and my wonderful partner in crime, co-host is Jess Dodson. Say hi, Jess.
Hi, Jess. So I am Jess Dodson. I am a customer engineer with inside Microsoft. I came from a system administration background doing identity and on-prem Active Directory and Windows Server, and I've now kind of somehow morphed into being a security operations administrator. So I do a lot of security stuff. So I'm pretty much the person who will yell at you if you're doing the wrong thing up in the cloud from a security perspective, which is quite a lot of fun for me, probably less fun for the people I'm yelling at, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of learning. And a lot of the customers that I'm dealing with, and I'm sure you are as well, Sonia, are customers who are moving from on-prem to the cloud as part of this modernization journey. I hate that word. I know you hate that word just as much as I hate that word. It's just so that's what we're here to discuss.
Absolutely. There's a reason that we pick controversial topics like modernization, because I know that there are parts of the community and parts of organizations that throw that word around like it's a thing that everybody needs to be doing, and there are some people that are of the other end of the scale of, well, if it isn't broken, why am I fixing it kind of approach. And I like to think we land somewhere in the middle, but that's sort of the whole basis of this discussion today. It's one of those words that really does provoke a response in people, though, I think. I'm very conscious whenever I read something that has been written when it mentions modernizing and modernization, about how that's going to come across to the big cross-section of our audience. So let's discuss. This meeting today has no PowerPoint slides. It has nothing that's been pre-prepared. It really is just a community chat. So please feel free to jump into either the text chat if you'd prefer, or come off mute, or show us your beautiful faces. However you feel comfortable engaging. This is a discussion. It's not for Jess and I to sit here and preach, though we would quite happily talk about this topic for
we could totally do that. We could get quite stroppy about it, but we would like to hear other people's opinions on this. Probably to make sure that we're not living in an echo chamber, which is us sort of ranting at each other about this. But how do other people feel about this? What are other people seeing out there? What are you seeing out there in terms of modernization in your own environments? Are you being pressured to modernize? Are you seeing a bit of a stagnation where there's that, it's not broken, let's not fix it? What are you seeing?
Yeah. And let's start with what that means. So what do you think, Jess, when you hear the term modernization? And I want to maybe put it in the perspective of scenarios where modernization is being taken on board and changes are made and it's a good thing, versus where modernization is seen to be just something that people are doing for the sake of doing it, maybe.
So a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing, I'm actually enjoying the security modernization. So it's looking at some of the newer security tools that are out there, seeing that they stack up better against what they've currently got, or they complement what they've already got, and modernizing their security operations skills and tool sets and processes to actually become better at securing organizations and enterprise environments. And that's what I'm seeing. And I find that really, really good. What I don't like seeing is the, oh, look, a new shiny toy, let's jump on that and do that, and forget about all of the other old stuff that they've got that is still needed and is still useful, but just looking at the new and shiny. And that's the part of the modernization that I hate. It's like, this is a new toy, we want to play with that, forgetting all of the other stuff that you have to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that in organizations. Sometimes it's a change in management where someone comes in and they're like, we should be doing this thing. And you're like, I've been trying to tell you for the last 5 years that you should be doing that. Or no, actually, I've been trying to tell you for the last 5 years you should be doing this other thing. And you've been here 2 minutes. And because you prefer product X, now we're doing that. Like, hello. So, and I think that is the nature of change. We've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that throughout my IT career without talking about the newfangled flavour of sticking this label of modernisation on it when you're talking about changing systems or changing platforms or whatever that comes into it, unfortunately. And it's hard to understand sometimes where the justification is for those kind of decisions. Sometimes it literally is there's someone new in the org or someone's been reorged into a position where they now have the authority to go with what they think is the best thing or the thing that they prefer, which can be hard if you've been working in that environment for a long time. But I like that you also mentioned about the skills, because I think, a part of it that we like to talk about is it's not just the latest version of something or the cloud version of something. It's the skills that you need to work in that kind of environment as well. And what are you doing, or how do we upskill into this sort of new environment and these new ways of working? It's always a challenge for IT pros because we tend to spend so much of our time doing the work that needs to be done, right? So we don't often have the luxury of putting aside time just to dedicate on skilling, and we tend to be very much what I call just-in-time learners, right? You go and learn a thing because you need to use that right now. You're not generally, in your workplace at least, you don't generally have the luxury of turning around and go, look, I might just go and look at that new emerging technology that we might not even adopt for the next 12 months. Like we don't have that luxury of time.
We never get that. We never get that. It's very much that on demand, and I don't think that's just with skills. I'm finding that for, at least going back into my previous life, a lot of the modernisation, and I'm sure that's been the case as well as we've seen with COVID, that it's a matter of importance to modernise because of an external pressure. So an example of that one from mine was Windows Server 2003 going end of life. They went, oh crap, we've got to do something about that. And I'm like, I've been telling you that for literally 5 years. We need to do something about this. And it's not until we're 18 months out that you've actually sat up and paid attention. I'm sure COVID has had similar sort of implications in terms of that modernisation of people going, oh, we're going to have all of these people working from home. We now need to modernise our network. We now need to modernise our communication paths. How do we go about doing that? So I'm just hoping that, as you were saying, like the skills, that we're bringing those skills along rather than just dumping the admins in it and going, well, it's yours to deal with now. Good luck.
Alice has mentioned about projects and third parties driving new tech. I think that's it, right? There always needs to be this compelling reason to change. Unfortunately, some of the things that we think are important, or we know they're important from infrastructure perspectives, like upgrading off older versions of operating systems, just for example, organizations tend to hold on to that kind of thing for longer because they think they can get away with it, right? So we announce it's end of life and you've got all this runway, and then we might extend how long you can get patches for and stuff. And so a lot of organizations tend to think, well, it's still running, and like maybe it's going to take like the hardware to fall over or some other compelling reason to need to change. I think you're right. COVID was one of those levers, and I've talked about this before about COVID forced us to make changes in our organization because we didn't have the luxury of not changing, right? We had to change. We had to change. We had to do it. It wasn't just, I think remote working would be good for productivity. Like maybe this is something we should try. We didn't have that sort of experiment led for someone to turn around and go, yeah, actually, no, we're not going to bother. It was a survival mode change in that one as well. But I also like that Peter put this definition about modernism and postmodernism as far as art goes, and that it really is just the new normal, because change and adaptation is constant. And you're absolutely right, because when I first started in tech, I was building new PCs by copying DOS files from like a backpack disk into a new PC. And that was how we were building new PCs, because we had 286s and 386s, and now I'm really aging myself, that ran on DOS, and that was how we built new computers. And I think the big first modernization project that I was involved in was a shift off Novell NetWare servers and IPX, token ring networks into Windows NT servers and TCP/IP. And that was massive, like that kind of a shift to go from those older styles of platforms into this new world with group policy and Active Directory that Microsoft had just brought out was a massive change. And I think, like, to some extent, cloud is a change that is as big as what that was. But I think there's a lot of people in the industry now that don't have that background, that have not seen such a massive shift like that in what we did and how we rolled things out and how we did IT ops and management. And it is kind of funny because I look back on that with hindsight now and go, well, yeah, like we've always changed. We don't always change on such a massive scale, but this job has always changed and evolved. And the new modern things that we're looking at doing now are just the next step in this ever-changing industry. It's one of the things I love about it, though. It's
a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. And I think the essence of this IT pro role, though, right, is that a lot of what we do is still ubiquitous. It's still foundational in terms of, providing secure environments, providing environments that operate well and perform well and are backed up, and all of those things that we do haven't changed, but it's the how we do them. The technologies we're using, the tools we're using, all of that stuff is different. And to be honest, probably will be different in another 10 years' time.
I really like Peter's comment. Maybe it's because I work in education academia. I've not heard modernisation around our upgrading and upskilling. And I think that's probably the case. So I worked for University of Queensland for a while, and it was almost like there wasn't really a modernisation push. It was just seen as this is part of what you do going forward. And maybe that is that learning mindset being in an education kind of area, that it's just things will always be changing. You will always have to be learning new skills. So maybe the industry you're in does change the terminology. And I did see that Alice was pointing out people from the private sector pushing DevOps. Yeah, I hate the idea. Look, I get DevOps. I understand DevOps. If it's implemented well, I absolutely love it. What I see, though, is that private sector is like, yeah, do DevOps. And public sector's like, so what you mean is we can get one person to do 2 jobs. Woohoo! No, that's not the case. That's not how it works. Or worse, if you do DevSecOps and it's 3 jobs in one person. No, just no.
I love that you brought that up, because DevOps is one of the controversial topics that we're actually going to talk about 1 month this year. It's on our schedule to address a rant about DevOps.
So we're going to have a whole rant there.
Yes,
awesome.
Yes, we are. There's a couple of other ones that I want to pick up on the comments too. I love these comments. Keep them coming. Digital transformation is flavor of the year. Yeah, I did a nice little rant on LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn and look for me, you can find it, about how COVID didn't fuel your digital transformation. It fueled what I call digital adaptation. And digital adaptation was when we started using technology in the survival mode. We changed how we worked and we used the tools that we had, or we added some new ones in to carry on and keep our businesses running. But I think it misses the ethos of digital transformation in its true essence of actually literally transforming how you work. So changing how you deliver your services or your products, or changing what products or services that you deliver, right? To me, digital transformation is going from renting DVDs to using streaming services, right? That kind of business transformation happened because digital technologies enabled it. And that, to me, is true digital transformation. It's not just enabling people to have Teams meetings remotely. So I have thoughts and opinions on that. But Peter also mentioned that, do you think that rapid change is leading to change fatigue? And is there a tipping point where and less efficient? Yes.
Yes, 100%. I don't know. At least a lot of the organisations that I'm dealing with are feeling this fatigue of having to completely reinvent the way that they are doing not just their jobs, but from an IT pro's perspective, having to reinvent the way everyone else is doing their job as well, and having to then they're learning on the fly how to do all of this and then having to teach that and upskill their user base how to do that. So I think maybe for users, there might be a little bit of a change fatigue, but certainly for the IT pros who are implementing a lot of this, there is heavy change fatigue because they're having to do so much of it and then upskill everybody else in it as well.
Yeah, and there's been a few messages in here about change as far as other teams as well. I'm just reading Erin talking about implementing MEM in the environment and facing hesitation from other teams. There's a reason that corporate change managers exist as a thing. Like, change management in the corporate world is a communication skill. And a lot of organizations do change management, and in particular technology change management, without the skills of actually helping adults, deal with change. There's a lot of communication stuff that goes on. And I think it's not so much how we communicate the impact of the change, because I think that for the most part, every IT pro I've dealt with is really good at talking to the end user customers about, this is what's different, like this is how you're going to sign in from now on, or whatever. We do that stuff naturally because we understand the importance and we have those communication skills. But a lot of the time, I think that these changes, maybe to our business and sometimes even to the IT department, to be honest, feel like they've sort of come out of the blue and we don't really understand the ethos of or the importance of why they're happening. So something like endpoint management, we know, is a vital part of your organization's security posture because of how distributed our workforces are, about how our workloads aren't just only sitting on our on-prem networks, blocked by our firewalls, only accessible by the corporate IT devices that are sitting in the offices anymore. And so, and the other part of this is another whole conversation that we could have, right, is this consumer approach to devices where our users have an experience with technology that they use in their personal lives, how they handle, if they've got a personal email account, how they use social media, how they store and share photos, like how they access and share and use technology at home, is an experience that they have, that they're used to, that they're comfortable with, whether they're iPhone or Android or Mac or whatever. And to step into a work environment where work is turning around and going, yes, but your device has to be in tune, like this has to be managed. We need to make sure that we're enforcing like 6-digit PIN codes on these mobile devices. Our users just go like, why? Like, why do you make it so much harder for me to do my work when I can just do it in this, like I can just upload stuff to Dropbox and share it with everyone and it's easy. And we just go, oh no.
Yeah.
And that's how you get shadow IT, right?
Yes, you got it.
The challenge that we get is, the harder you make things for people, the more they're just going to run off and buy, their own Azure with a credit card, or their own 365 with a credit card, or their whatever. And it's about having that like fine balance between control and security and usability, which I think seems to get lost in a lot of security people's minds sometimes. And I say that as someone who's worked in security.
Absolutely. Look, I'd like to think that that's getting better. I mean, things like Windows Hello, certainly from an end user perspective, it's so much easier for me just to stare at that camera than it is to remember to type in a password, that kind of thing. So I think there is some...
I would like to say that Windows Hello is great, except for when it doesn't recognize you because something's happened to your machine and you have no idea what your actual password is, and then you have to actually go into the office and speak to somebody. I had this happen in February. I'm like, I don't know what my password is. I haven't typed it in for I don't know how long.
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. So what sort of skills are you seeing, Jess, that people are starting to learn, or that you think IT pros need to pick up, that are valid to moving IT processes into a modern age and taking advantage of the new tools and technologies we've got?
So I'm going to come from very platform agnostic. So I think cloud skills in general, be it be it Microsoft, be it Azure, be it Google Cloud, be it AWS. I don't think it really matters. If you've got some cloud skills, that's certainly going to stand you in good stead, because a lot of the cloud principles are the same no matter what cloud you end up going with. It doesn't really matter. I think understanding all of the differences between, say, platform as a service versus infrastructure as a service versus software as a service, and understanding all of the as's is really going to underpin how people start looking at shifting a lot of their infrastructure and where they start looking at placing it, rather than just a pick up and lift and shift, or whether they start looking at actually redesigning their applications and their workflows to work better in the cloud. I do see a lot of the lift and shift, and that's usually for emergency reasons. I would like to see less of the lift and shift and more of a, well, how is this actually operating and can we make it better? And I think that's something that a lot of IT pros could probably assist with, because they understand all of the infrastructure that underpins it and whether it would work in either a PaaS or a SaaS format. Security-wise, any security skills I think are going to be really useful. The big buzzword at the moment is identity is the new frontier. It is, let's be honest. So it's the new gateway. Everyone's supposed to be protecting their identities. So identity administrators, identity security, all of that's going to be really crucial. So the more you understand about how your identities work is going to be good. And they're probably the big ones that I'm seeing from my perspective out in the world.
Yeah, excellent. I like it. Is it the final frontier? It's just
I hope not, because if our identities are our final frontier and I keep forgetting my password, that's going to be really depressing.
No, I like it. So I'm going to add in there. Things like an understanding of PowerShell. If you're working in the Microsoft space, is really important. PowerShell is one of those things that I dabble around the edges with, and I think there is this balance between how long is it going to take me to figure out how to script it versus me just going ahead and doing it through the GUI. So there is a little bit of that, but for tasks that are repeatable, for tasks that you want to make a process that any of your sysadmins can follow, that kind of thing, it's a lot easier to script that kind of stuff and document that well, to be able to have that as being the way that we do things around here. It means that there's less human error. It's a lot easier to document that stuff than it is to take screenshots of, of the portal steps, for example. So there's some really good resources for learning PowerShell. Once you click to how the language is structured, as if you were learning a foreign language where you've got verbs and actions, it does make it a little bit easier to understand. I must profess it's not something that I'm particularly strong in, but I know enough to understand how it works and to be able to go and explore particular scripts for PowerShell and PowerShell commands when I need them. So I understand enough to know what's relevant and what's not relevant when I'm trying to figure out how to do the thing that I want to do. In conjunction with that, and this isn't just a Microsoft thing now, is GitHub. So GitHub, again, is one of those things that I'm like, that's something that developers use. It's not my happy space. There was a thing going around on social media not long ago where you could actually print out like your GitHub skyline. And so what GitHub does is it fills in like little colored blocks when you commit things or you contribute to something that you've got in a GitHub repository, and you could print out, they made it into this little 3D landscape, and literally mine is dead set flat the entire year. I think I've got 3 little buildings that might be maybe 2 stories high, and that's it. And the only reason that they exist is because I did a project contributing to some content on Microsoft Learn, which sits in a GitHub repository in the back end. It's all marked down in Git. So I had to learn it to actually produce this content. It's the only reason my little skyline has got any buildings on it all, because it's not a platform that I live in. But again, I've picked up enough of the basics now to understand forking a repo and doing some of the stuff in there where I commit it and then I do a pull request to get it approved to merge into the master. And these were all terms that I had no idea about before I started playing with it because I needed to. And again, that just comes back to how I think IT pros learn and experiment with stuff, right? It's on this as needed basis. But what I am seeing is in our space, there is a lot more contribution and storage, and this is now the place that we go to when we're looking for code snippets. And it's not code snippets for running up an application. It's Azure Policy, for example. So Azure Policy is a great example of if you want to enforce something in your cloud environment, or you want to audit whether that thing does or doesn't exist in your environment, you can use Azure Policy. Azure Policy underneath the hood is JSON, and a really good place to store JSON is in GitHub. And so we have a public Azure Policy repository where people in the general public can download the samples that we put, and if they find an error or if they want to contribute something that they've developed, they can go and pop that in the GitHub repo and get that approved into the samples database as well. So that's kind of a nice little example of where we're starting to see this meld between what was a developer tool, and that extends into things like VS Code that now IT pros are starting to use and starting to use more of.
And it's really handy that you actually mentioned that. So GitHub, I use GitHub quite extensively because I do a lot of work with Azure Sentinel, and all the Sentinel queries and detection rules and all of that are written in KQL, which we can put quite nicely up into GitHub. So there's a whole lot of stuff in GitHub. We also have a KQL syntax formatter inside of VS Code, so you can write it all inside of VS Code. So I spend a lot of time in VS Code and in GitHub pulling out detection rules and all that kind of stuff to play around with inside VS Code. And I look back on it now and I'm like, I would never have imagined that I'd be doing this.
I know, right? Me too. That is so interesting. It's a brave new world for us, Jess. It still hasn't convinced me to go and write any application code, but
oh God, no. No. Scripting, yes. Coding, no.
Yes, coding. So that takes us to infrastructure as code. Now, I must admit that I'm not finding a lot of people that are doing a heck of a lot of stuff with infrastructure as code, but I think I'm probably playing in the wrong end of the market for that. Because I'm not seeing it a lot in smaller organizations, which was my most recent background. But I know that we have a lot of larger customers where infrastructure as code is definitely being a thing, especially when you want to give development teams the ability to go and spin out some infrastructure resources in Azure. And then there's a whole IT pro story behind using role-based access control to put some boundaries on what they can deploy and where they can deploy it, and then the cost management associated with that. So making sure that it's got the right tagging so that we can then run reports and make sure that they're aware of how much that infrastructure that they've spun up has been costing them. But, you know, obviously there's a big investment in Azure Resource Manager templates or ARM templates. And now that we've released Bicep, and how Bicep fits in to help writing ARM templates as well, that's kind of another area that I haven't dipped my toe strongly in the water with yet. But it's certainly a thing, and I think it's sort of your mileage may vary, isn't it, Jess, in terms of whether or not you see that used much in an organisation or not.
And it does depend very much on like the size of the organization, how much you're seeing infrastructure being spun up and spun down. So a lot of the organizations that I deal with are large government and large enterprise. So I see Azure Blueprints being used really heavily. So that way it sort of packages up all of it. You've got your role-based access control tied in, you've got your policy tied in, and then you've got all your ARM templates on top of that as well. So I do see that being done quite a lot. Whether it's being done well, that's probably another matter. Some of it is, I'd like to see a little bit more done rather than just it being like a very homogenous, here you go, here's like our base and we build on that. I'd like to see a little bit more work done around the fine tuning of some of those templates. But on the whole, I do see infrastructure as code moving forward a lot more. We're seeing it more like, as you said, Azure Policy. We see that being pushed out a lot more. A lot of the role-based access control stuff that we can do now can be done through policy too. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch the GUIs slowly disappear and more of it being done as code.
Look, you see that to some extent already, even with things like Exchange Online, right? So Exchange Online, there are certain things that you can't do through the Exchange Admin Center anymore. They've got to be done through PowerShell commands. Jacinta's just put a message in there about customers wanting security and compliance stuff codified. Can you expand a little bit on how you're seeing that done? So, I mean, we've talked about Azure Policy, and I know that's part of it. Is that kind of what you're meaning in terms of how people are doing that? One of the other things that I'm sort of interested in is people that are using other tools outside of the native tooling. And by that, I mean, there's a few conversations that come up, for example, about taking data about how your infrastructure is running in Azure and pumping that out to a Power BI dashboard, or integrating some automation for your environment with Logic apps. And I wrote a blog post about taking resource health alerts from Azure and using Logic apps to pump them out and as an alert into a Teams channel. So we're seeing that kind of cross-product way of modernizing your processes in your environment too.
And I like that. So one of the things I can see what Sim was saying is talking about picking up blueprints or their existing GPOs and trying to find a way to apply that up in Azure Office 365 and having that done in such a way that it's coded rather than it's manually like you would with GPO, having to go through and click on settings to be able to find what you needed to do. So in terms of, I do see a lot of the security stuff being done as part of policy more now. So it's being set as part of a policy, being an enforcement that way, but that's more of a compliance than a security as such, if that makes sense. I don't know, like trying to codify a lot of the security stuff. Maybe if you're looking at doing that through some of your seams, it's possible to do, but a lot of the security stuff, I'm very big on, you still need a human there to do a lot of it because you still need a human to look at it.
Yeah, I think in terms of those alerts and that investigation, absolutely for sure. The interesting part too, I think, about codifying some of this stuff though is making those decisions about what's important, right? And it's about making sure that you're getting the signals from the noise. And that kind of leads us nicely into what we're going to be talking about next month, which is monitoring, which also suffers from this problem of there are lots of things you could monitor, or there are lots of alerts that you could put in your SIEM system, but what do you actually need to be looking at and what don't you need to be looking at? One of the shining lights that I think that we're starting to see now is the use of some AI to help surface the stuff that really is important, rather than us having to define what that is or what it isn't. With Microsoft security products, we do that with some of the ways that we analyze signals and we provide alerts to you based on behavior that we're seeing that isn't good. And again, it's not because someone's sitting in our SOC and going, yeah, no, I don't think that log and that activity actually is a good thing. It's the fact that we're using AI and we're training AI to say, this is indicative of a good thing, this is indicative of a bad thing, so that we can start to give you some quality alerts that then you can go in action. Doesn't mean they're always 100%, but it's about that behavioral analytics actually surfacing something for you to look at, rather than you having to define the rules of this thing is good, this thing isn't bad, this is the threshold when something good might actually be bad. So we're starting to see that a little bit on the security side, and we also see it, and not a lot of people know that, and again, I'll probably bring this up again next week, in Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor has some intelligence built into those alerts that you can use, where it will actually benchmark the performance of a system, and it will learn over time and go, hey, look, this virtual machine generally runs at this kind of a performance level, and it can take into account that it might not be as heavily hit performance-wise on a Saturday and Sunday if the server's not being used on the weekends, but it learns kind of what's normal, and then it can start to alert us for what is outside of the parameters of normal for that machine. But then it can also start to learn if we make adjustments to that workload to relearn what the new normal is for that system. And I think that, when that first came out, was so exciting to me, because it was the first time that I think I'd ever really seen AI and machine learning applied to something that was relevant to the work that I do. All of the other examples I've seen are things like image detection and, all this other analysis of data to see if it's an apple or an orange kind of thing. And it never kind of clicked to me in terms of the relevance of how does this make my job better. And I think that kind of intelligence in our systems is just the tip of the iceberg of what IT pros will have at their fingertips moving forward to help remove out some of the noise and remove out us having to make manual decisions about stuff and being able to surface those insights.
At least from my perspective, I saw that and thought that was really funny. From a security perspective, a lot of the stuff that I'm starting to look at involves that machine learning. So we call it user and entity behavior analytics. So it's taking a look at what your users are doing on a day-to-day basis and working out what is considered a baseline for them. And then if something happens that is outside of what they would normally do, or what is outside of what their direct colleagues would do, or the people who are geographically in their area would do, it will alert, which I find absolutely fascinating. It's made a massive difference to some of the alerts that we've seen. So every time I have put Sentinel in an organization, we have found something weird that's going on due to the machine learning of finding out what their users are doing. Not always an outside threat, can sometimes be a user inside doing dodgy things. And that's the part that I find the most interesting. So it's looking at some of those insider threats, which I think at the moment is top of mind for a few people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I'm just Alice has mentioned that they are currently building a giant reporting warehouse and complex data components to feed to a Power BI report as the app interface for customers. Look,
wow.
I just love that this area of technology that we all live and work in is so varied. Like there's so much scope to do interesting things with different areas of tech. So that's really cool to see.
Maren, if you need any questions answered or you want to poke someone about it, feel free to hit me up for anything about Sentinel. I am happy to impart my wisdom. I share the information. I might as well make use of it.
I'm going to take your word for that.
Go for it.
Yeah, you mentored me last time on Tribute, so this time it will be more engaging. Now I know the topic to discuss with you.
Sentinel, definitely.
It's interesting. We could have we actually done we've done security as a topic, haven't we?
We had Bronwyn and do we have Sarah as well at that time? Yeah, on for a chat around security. We did. I think we are doing a security topic later this year though.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, and that is the thing, you know, when Jess and I sit down and look at kind of the topics we could talk about in this, we're like a kid in a candy store. Like there's so much variety that we could go and poke.
Yes, we do have. We've got security lined up for May.
Oh, nice.
Yes,
excellent.
That will be exciting.
It's really cool. All right. I am conscious of time. We might wrap this up. So thank you so much for everybody in the comments. My team has a little blog at a website called itopstalk.com that I'm just going to put in the post. So if you're interested in all things IT ops related, especially on the Microsoft stack in the hybrid environment, we've actually recently put a blog post up at itopstalk.com about the new security exams that have just come out. So the SC- exam, Sarah Lean's done a great post there if you're interested in just taking a look at what they cover, including M365 security as well. So go and check out our blog for some cool stuff. If you've got any ideas for topics that you want to see us writing about, just ping me and let me know. Our next meeting is the 29th of April. So we run these on the last Thursday of the month. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about monitoring and SRE, so site reliability engineering. That's another little specialized pocket of tech that we have some crossover with from our IT pros. So if you know anybody in the monitoring or the SRE space, feel free to invite them along. We'd love to have people in this discussion that really have that on their heart to talk about, and you can send them to I'm just putting the bit.ly link in the chat, so you can send them to WomenITPros APAC, and that is the new short link for our Eventbrite page for our Women IT Pros group. So even though I've stolen WomenITPros APAC is the bit.ly shortener, you will also see the upcoming events for our US and EMEA region events as well that go on. Whether they're in your time zone or not, it's a different story, but what we do is we tend to push those recordings out to our YouTube channel. So we have our Women IT Pros YouTube channel as well that you can find from there. So thank you for coming and joining us, and have an awesome month, and we'll see you next month for monitoring.
It'll be lots of fun. Thank you for participating today. It was great chat.
Bye.